I am an avatar and I am here to introduce Professor Albrecht. She is a philosopher specialized in non-existent objects. She will talk about some problems concerning avatars like myself. It's not so clear what sort of thing I am, or if I am human, or if I even exist. Let's see what Professor Albrecht has to say about it.
Okay, welcome. I'm going to talk about avatars today. Do you know what an avatar is? It's those things as this created human, or maybe not human being. It's a character in a virtual world, a digital representation that you can find in different virtual environments. There are many different virtual environments, and I'm going to focus on what's called an MMORPG or an MMORPG. And these are massively multiplayer online role-playing games where people can create an avatar and control the avatar. The avatar then can interact with other avatars. The avatar can interact with other avatars and non-player characters. The avatar can travel around in that virtual world, and traveling is actually quite easy because you can fly or teleport and visit different places. You can visit places, recreation of actual places in that virtual world. You can actually buy and sell goods, including land, and there's a substantial profit that one can make. So this is a millions industry. People can also just play there, fight monsters, complete quests, and so forth. They can make friends, and people even get married to other avatars in these worlds. So there are the most popular virtual worlds are World of Warcraft, and that has almost 8 million subscribers this year, and the other one is Second Life, and that has about 600,000 active players. So this is not just for computer people. So a lot of people engage in these worlds. There are, students, professionals, housewives, all sorts of people engage in these. And they're virtual worlds for all different people. They're virtual worlds for children, for games. There are X-rated virtual worlds and so forth. So you can find a lot of them on the internet. I will focus on some of the problems there. So some of the problems are moral, some are legal, or some are both. That is concerning the status and protection of the avatars, privacy notions, property rights, and also First Amendment rights. Now, I want to focus here today on something specific, namely something related to research that is being conducted in virtual worlds. And the research that is conducted comes basically from the social sciences, that is, social psychologists investigate avatars, sociology, and there are also consumer research projects that are going on there. Now, all these investigate human behavior, and that's what it's all about. And the virtual environments are very convenient for all these researchers because as opposed to doing research with real people, it's very difficult to find all these people with the same interests. In virtual environments, people can find their research subjects by thousands, and they don't even have to leave their desks. So that's why it's become very popular research ground over the past 10 years or so. Now, some of the research focuses on the gamers. That is, the gamers are these people who sit in front of their computer and control the avatars. And the research pertains to how the gamers are affected by the interaction with the virtual world, and also what kind of avatars they choose, and so on and so forth. So here the research subjects are the gamers. But, and that's what I'm more interested in, there are also research projects that focus on avatars only. That is, these are purely in-world research projects where the research investigates avatar behavior. There is, for example, a thing that's called the Proteus effect, that is, avatar appearance influences avatar behavior. And much like in the real world, good-looking avatars are more self-confident, taller avatars, I think they're more forthcoming and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of studies out there that investigates how it does make a difference for an avatar's behavior how she or he looks. Now, there's also investigations of compliance tactics with avatars, and there's numerous studies within these virtual worlds. Now, again, the question here, if we deal with only the in-world research, that is, research that only focuses on avatars, the question is, what is the research subject here? So is the avatar really the subject of such investigation? Is it really the research subject? If we end up saying, yes, it is, then we should say, well, then there should apply human research protocol, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. On the other hand, we might say, wait a minute, how can the avatar be the research subject? Aren't you in the end researching the gamer? Because the gamer controls the avatar. So perhaps the ultimate research subject is the gamer. And the next question then is, well, is the gamer really the same as the avatar? Are they identical? Now, I'm going to answer that question by saying no. There's a distinction between the avatar and the gamer for two main reasons. One is that from a philosophical point of view, you would say if there's identity, then things should share all their properties. They should have all the features they have in common, but that's not the case with an avatar and the gamer. So they have precisely different properties, and that's, of course, the fun of being in, virtual worlds. You can have different features than you really have. So, therefore, they cannot be identical if they don't share all their properties. Now, moreover, from a pragmatic point of view, as the research with these avatars shows, you can say, well, the avatar's body, or well, the virtual body of the avatar affects the behavior. So that has been shown, but the avatar's body might not be the same as the gamer's. And there's also a discrepancy that, research with gamers showed that they have a different perception of themselves as they have of their avatars. So there's a difference between the gamer's self-perception and the gamer's perception of the avatar. So therefore, again, the avatar is really the research subject, since we can't identify the gamer with the avatar. So we have to look in, is the avatar the real subject of such research? Now, the second question is, are avatars human subjects? You might think, oh, wait a minute. Are we dealing with a human subject, or what kind of a thing is it anyway that we're dealing with when dealing with avatars? So do avatars even exist? I mean, they're, cyber objects, and you can say they don't really exist in this world, right? So they're not in this theater, and they don't really exist in this world. So what kind of things then are avatars? What sort of things, or are they even things, right? So if they don't exist in this world, can we say, oh, maybe they exist in another world, or exist kind of in a cyber world? But then again, you may wonder, what does that mean to exist in a cyber world? Do things in a cyber world really exist? So that's the problem. And then, of course, the other problem is, if avatars don't exist, or especially if they don't exist in this world, how can they possibly be human? You would think to be human, you have to exist in this world, right? So now, I have done a bunch of research on non-existent objects, right? And you might think, oh, that's convenient, so you research nothing. And it's not really nothing, but there are a bunch of, as you can say, we can think about, well, are avatars non-existent? Or think of fictional objects, right? They don't exist either. Now, there is a philosopher by the name of Meinong, and he's at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. He held a thesis that he said there are objects of which it is the case that, of which it is true that there are no such objects. Now, he was interested in an object theory that would include all objects, not just existing objects. And he said, we are prejudiced in favor of the actual, right? So he also thought, well, nobody's really worried about numbers and concepts, even though it's clear that numbers and concepts don't really exist either, right? At least not like, you know, those tables and chairs in the real world. And he thought, well, there are different modes of being. So he thought that numbers and stuff doesn't exist, but he thought it's a different mode of being. It's not really existing, and he called it they subsist, and he had a whole other bunch of terms for such objects. Now, Meinong was at first not really taken seriously, and people thought, well, this guy is completely out of touch with reality. And he even got ridiculed. You can say that's crazy that there are objects that don't exist. Now, one of his more important theses was that one that's called the independence thesis. And that's the thesis that objects have their property independent of their being or their mode of being. So it doesn't matter whether or not an object exists or subsists or even has any sort of being in order to have the properties it has. So in other words, he thought, well, Pegasus has wings, and Pegasus actually has wings, even though Pegasus doesn't even exist in the first place. And more strikingly, he also thought that the round square is round and square, by the way, even though it's impossible for it to exist, right? And the problem, of course, is how can anything have properties if there is no such object in the first place? Now, with those non-existent objects, you might think, does that sound outlandish? That sounds kind of crazy to have, you know, objects that don't exist, and to even talk about objects that don't exist, or even include them in your theory. However, modern logic has become interested in that kind of stuff, and now, over the past 20 years, perhaps 20 or 30 years, logicians come up with, well, maybe there is something to these Meinongian objects, and these Meinongian objects are these objects of which we can say they have their properties regardless of their ontological status or regardless of whether they exist or something else is the case for them. So one of these logicians is Graham Priest, and he called this theory Nonism. So that's a theory that is based on Meinongian objects, and that says objects have the properties that characterize them, maybe not in this actual world, but in that world in which they are. So whatever that world is in which they are, is in a possible world, in an impossible world, or we might here say perhaps in a cyber world, right? Now, yeah, how does that relate to what I started to talk about? Well, is my avatar human, or how to deal with avatars if we say, well, they don't really exist, they don't exist like these tables and chairs, but rather they, or maybe in a cyber world, I personally would say I just even don't care about the world, but I stick with it as being a Meinongian object in the sense that they have their properties independent of their status of existence or non-existence. So what are these typical human properties that we would think a human has? We say it's a rational being, it's a social being, it communicates in language, and we can add other properties here. Now, in that sense, then, we have to say, is my avatar human? Well, not just for me, but for those researchers, the non-existence of the avatar doesn't really seem to be a problem. For those researchers who do research cyber worlds and avatar behavior specifically in these virtual worlds, and of course, they also consider their research results as valid, right? So they do think that we can gain insight in human behavior by studying avatar behavior. And again, the gamers don't really seem to mind that these objects don't exist. So gamers respond to avatars just like they respond often, or their responses are very similar to responses to real people. So now back, how human is my avatar then? Again, based on the independence principle, I can say the avatar is human independently of her non-existence in this world, if the avatar has human features, right? So therefore, then we would say the avatar is human, even though not existing. Now, yeah, what are the consequences of that claim? And it might still seem strange to you, but we can say perhaps we might just in case, because these avatars exhibit human behavior, that rules of ethics apply for interactions with avatars, and that also other laws would likewise apply that require certain interactions. So in-world research then also would require human subject research protocol, which includes that there's informed consent given, that the subject knows that research is being conducted, what kind of research, and to which end the research is conducted. But also, you would say, as early studies especially, they did not reveal the researchers did not reveal to the avatars that they are doing research. They pretended, or they created their own avatars interacting with the research subjects in a virtual world without the subjects knowing that there was such research done. So this would really violate principles that you can't deceive research subjects. So, and of course, including informed consent. Now, question is, who's supposed to give the consent, right? Do we need the consent from the gamer, or who should give the consent to the research? But as I've said before, ultimately the subject of such research is an avatar. So the avatar should give consent ultimately. And this will also be pragmatically a little bit easier. Now, from a pragmatic perspective, or from an empirical perspective, we can just say, well, ultimately what happens in a virtual world doesn't stay in that world. That's my avatar. Okay, thank you.